"We sold the house, Dad. You're going to have to be out before the end of the month." He tossed the words onto the middle of the table like a stone, with absolute dryness, not a tremor in his voice, not the slightest hint of compassion. I looked up at my oldest son, Daniel, and for a fleeting instant, I thought I'd misheard. But no. The sentence just hung in the air, as heavy as stale cigarette smoke. There was no hello, no "How are you, Dad?" No hug, no smile. It was just him, and some young lawyer in a dark blue suit, holding a briefcase like he was delivering a package. I didn't say anything. I just kept slowly chewing the bite I had in my mouth. With every chew, my heart beat harder. My name is Ezekiel Miller, and I am 81 years old. Never in my life has a word scared me. But today, a simple sentence from the son I raised with my own hands made me feel as small as a child, abandoned in the middle of the street. The lawyer opened his briefcase, and with a polite but distant voice said, "Mr. Miller, your son and daughter-in-law have already signed the contract. The property has been sold." Then he slid some papers across the table. I didn't touch them. I just took another sip of coffee and wiped my mouth with the cloth napkin that was resting on my lap. "Interesting," I murmured, showing no emotion, though inside a slow fire was beginning to burn. I looked at Daniel's face. He didn't dare look up. Those eyes that once shone with excitement when I taught him how to hold a hammer were now fixed on the floorboards, like those of a stranger. "Did you understand, Mr. Miller?" the lawyer asked. I answered slowly, marking every syllable. "Yes, son, loud and clear." Daniel remained silent. I stared at him until he was forced to lift his head. I searched his gaze for a trace of regret, a hint of the boy who once called me his hero. But there was nothing, only distance, a wall of ice between father and son. They left. I walked them to the gate without saying another word. When the gate latched shut, I stood motionless for a long time. The morning sun bathed the yard, lighting up the old lemon tree I planted the day Daniel learned to walk. It had some dry, broken branches, the leaves yellowing. I sat down in my old wicker chair, and Rusty, my old dog, came over and rested his head on my knees. A tear rolled down my cheek, not of sadness, but of pure indignation. I whispered to him, and perhaps to myself, "They sold this house, Rusty, but they don't know yet that there are things in life that nobody can sell." I looked up at the clear sky, and in the morning light, I thought I heard the voice of Rose, my late wife, whispering from somewhere nearby, "Don't let them erase you, old man. Not yet." Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments below. This house isn't just bricks and mortar. Every wall, every tile, every scratch on the door is a fragment of my life. Rose and I built it with our own hands, back in a time when all we had was a wheelbarrow, a few bags of sand, and immense faith. I remember clearly that when we laid the first brick, Rose smiled and said, "Ezekiel, don't just build walls, build a home." That sentence, after so many decades, still echoes in my heart like a song. Every corner of this house is tied to a memory. The corner of the kitchen where Rose used to make her famous chili, filling the yard with its aroma. The small room at the end of the hall where Daniel learned to walk, stumbling and getting back up. The day Rose died, I sat on the porch all afternoon, watching the sun fade over the shingles. The whole house held a strange silence. You could only hear the wind whistling through the old window frames. In that moment, I swore I would protect this house until my heart stopped beating, because not only did her breath reside here, but mine too, that of the man she trusted with her whole life. This morning after Daniel and the lawyer left, I walked through the house, sliding my hand gently over the time-stained walls. Our wedding photo was still hanging, the wooden frame slightly crooked, but Rose's gaze in the picture was the same as always, warm and firm. I caught myself whispering, "They say they've sold it, but what do they know? How can you sell the place where you've buried your soul? I went out to the backyard. The lemon tree I planted when Daniel learned to walk was still there, its trunk gnarled, leaves sparse, and some branches dry and broken, but its roots clung deep to the earth. I looked at the tree and saw my own reflection in it. Old, rough, but refusing to fall. Rusty ran around my feet, barking softly. I bent down to pet his head. Remember, Rusty, when Daniel was little, he always wanted to pick lemons so his mother could make him lemonade. I had to lift him up so he could reach. I smiled, a smile tinged with melancholy and warmth. Inside, the scent of old coffee still lingered. The morning light filtered through the window, illuminating the floral curtains Rose had sewn by hand. I sat in a wooden chair and sighed. There are things in life we think are inanimate, but only when we're about to lose them do we understand that they are memories that breathe. I closed my eyes, listening to the sparrows singing on the porch. In that silence, Rose's voice seemed to return, soft but firm. This house isn't bought, it's sown. And as long as the root is alive, Ezekiel, no one can pull it up. I opened my eyes, looked at the old lemon tree, and managed a faint smile. Turns out the root is still here. That afternoon the sky turned gray, as if the whole neighborhood knew something had broken. I sat alone in the kitchen, my coffee now cold, the wicker chair creaking with my every move. From the window I saw Daniel's car parked outside, his silhouette fading with the dying light of day. I still couldn't believe it. The son I had carried on my shoulders, the one I had rushed to the hospital during his asthma attacks, had dared to enter my house today with a lawyer to announce that I had to leave the place where I had put down roots. I remembered Daniel at 10, a scrawny kid with eyes as bright as coal. I once built him a small wooden car, assembling each wheel with my own hands. He ran all over the yard, laughing his head off. Dad, when I grow up, I'm going to buy you a real one. A really big one. I just smiled, never imagining that promise, 40 years later, would become a dagger twisting in my heart. Now in front of me, all that was left was a pile of cold papers and a sentence as dry as dust. The house is sold. That word echoed in my head over and over, like the blow of a hammer. They hadn't just sold a house. They had sold the memories. They had sold their father's name. I poured more coffee, my hand trembling slightly. My gaze stopped on the wall where Daniel's handprints in the paint were still visible, from when he helped me with the first coat. Dad, I want to build with you, too. His voice echoed in my mind, clear and distant. I gently touched those faded prints, feeling a pang of pain. I didn't understand what could have changed a son so much. Was it his wife? Was it the money? Or was it simply time, which fades what they call blood ties? I always believed that children were an extension of their parents. But now I realize that sometimes that very extension is the knife that severs the past. I looked out at the yard where the old lemon tree swayed in the wind. A few dry branches fell, and the yellow leaves fluttered like ashes from years gone by. I got up and went out to the porch as the last light of day hit my face. In the wind, I thought I heard Rose's voice. There are some things that not even blood can save. I sighed, looking down the street where Daniel had disappeared. My son, if you ever realize that what you sold wasn't a house, but a father's heart, it will be too late. Rusty lay beside me, lifting his head as if he understood. I stroked his back and whispered, "We have nothing left to lose. Only the dignity we have left, Rusty. Only the dignity." Sitting in the empty kitchen, the faint afternoon light filtered through the floral curtains Rose had sewn, casting shadows on the old table. In front of me were the papers the young lawyer had left that morning. The sales contract, a forged signature, a fraudulent stamp. I didn't touch them, but every letter felt like a thorn digging into my heart. I'm not a man of high education, but my whole life I've been accustomed to telling the real from the fake with a craftsman's eye. A crooked brick, I notice it instantly. A bad weld. I correct it immediately. Now, looking at those signatures, I knew there was a deceitful hand behind it all. Rusty slept curled up at my feet. I petted his head and said in a hoarse voice, "See, old friend, they think this old man will just stand by while they throw him out on the street. But they forget I've spent my entire life working with the earth, with iron, with sweat. I know how to build, and I also know how to defend what I've built." I got up, went to my room, and opened the old drawer under the bed. There, inside a yellowed plastic bag, were all the house documents, the originals, with the red seal, my signature, and Rose's. I had kept them all my life as if they were my own skin. I spread each paper on the bed and took a deep breath. The smell of old paper mixed with the scent of wood, with the smell of time. "They want to take the house?" I muttered. "Then they'll have to face the law, not this old man." In my mind, a plan began to take shape. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't beg. I would use the memory and the experience that life had taught me. That afternoon, with the folder of documents under my arm, I went for a walk. The small dirt path that led to St. Augustine's was covered in dry leaves. I went inside and lit a candle for Rose. The flickering flame reflected in my eyes as I whispered to her, "They think I'm weak, my love, but I'm still here, and I won't let anyone insult this house or defile our love." As I left the church, I watched the evening sun tinge the treetops. I knew I would have to fight, but my heart felt strangely light. I had lived my whole life with integrity. I had nothing to fear. That night I made a simple dinner: white rice, black beans, and a small roasted chili pepper. After eating, I made myself a coffee and sat in my wicker chair, looking at Rose's photo. She smiled sweetly, as if she knew everything beforehand. "They think I'm old, that I have no strength left to resist," I said, without taking my eyes off the photo. "But they forget that the older you get, the better you know when to keep silent and when to hit back." Outside, the wind brought the damp smell of the night. I turned off the light, leaving only the glow filtering in from the kitchen, and whispered in the dark, "This battle, Rose, isn't to keep a roof. It's to keep a man's dignity." That night I slept deeply, but it wasn't the sleep of someone giving up, but of someone who is already prepared. The next morning I got up early, as was my custom for years. The air was cool, and a fine layer of dew covered the old bricks on the porch. I made myself a strong black coffee and sat watching the steam rise, listening to the soft thump of Rusty's tail against the floor. It had been a long time since my mind had felt so clear. Maybe it was because, for the first time in years, I knew exactly what I had to do. I put on the white linen shirt that Rose liked so much, carefully smoothing the sleeves. Then I folded a stack of documents I had prepared the night before and put them in my leather satchel. As I left, I turned to look at the faded wooden door. "Watch the house, Rusty," I said softly. The dog barked gently, as if he understood. I walked towards the center of town, through the same old streets. Mrs. Gable's bakery, the cafe where Rose and I used to sit every Sunday afternoon. Everything was the same, only I was different. I was no longer just an old man missing his wife, but a man about to reclaim what was his. I arrived at Mr. Elias's office and knocked gently on the door. My old friend's voice boomed from inside. "Come in, man, Ezekiel." His voice was still warm, though a little hoarser than before. Elias, with his hair almost completely white and reading glasses slipping down his nose, looked at me with surprise, but with genuine joy. We shook hands for a long time. "I've been told you still keep the habit of getting up early for black coffee," he said, smiling, as he poured me a cup with a slight hint of cinnamon. "That habit will follow me to the grave," I replied, and then placed my leather satchel on the table. "But I didn't come for coffee today, Elias. I came for you to see this." He tilted his head, opened the folder and began to turn the pages with those trembling but careful fingers of someone who knows the value of a seal and a signature. Several minutes passed, in which the only sounds were the ticking of the clock and the soft tapping of his pen on the desk. Finally, he looked up, his eyes shining behind his glasses. "Ezekiel, this is serious." "I know," I said, my voice deep, but I needed to hear it from someone who understands laws better than I do. Elias sighed, took off his glasses, and said slowly, "This contract has no legal validity. Your signature was forged. The property was never transferred. If they did this on purpose, this is fraud." I clenched my fists, feeling a mixture of relief and pain. "Does that mean I can sue them?" "Not only can you must," he replied firmly. "You need a good lawyer, one who isn't afraid of people with money and connections. I know someone." Elias opened a drawer and took out a slightly worn business card. "Monica Evans, attorney at law, property and family. She doesn't sell her conscience to anyone. Go see her. Tell her everything. You still have time, Ezekiel." I took the card, looking at the small black letters on the white background. A strange feeling grew in my chest, not of anger, but of confidence. Before I left, Elias put a hand on my shoulder. "I knew Rose. She would never have allowed anyone to touch this house. You're doing the right thing, old friend." Outside, the sun was already up. I walked out onto the street, feeling a gentle breeze in my hair. In my pocket, the small card crinkled like the beating of a heart. I knew the road ahead would be long, but at least this time I wouldn't be walking it alone. That afternoon, the sun was beating down on the pavement. I was standing in front of the building where Monica Evans' office was, clutching the card Mr. Elias had given me. My heart was pounding, not from exhaustion, but from nerves. In my 81 years of life, it was the first time I was going to talk to a lawyer, not to sign for building materials, but to defend myself. I went up to the second floor. The hallway was covered by a gray carpet, and the air smelled of coffee and new paper. The office door was ajar. A woman's voice, deep and clear, called out, "Come in, Mr. Miller. Mr. Elias already called me." I entered. The woman stood up from her desk. She wasn't very tall, wore her hair up in a bun, and her gaze was direct. There was no tone of superiority or pity in it, just the look of someone who knows how to listen. She gestured for me to sit and poured me a glass of water. "Mr. Elias told me a bit about your case, but I'd prefer to hear it from you." I told her everything, every detail, every morning, every cold word from Daniel. When I got to the part where he brought the young lawyer to read me the contract, I had to stop to take a deep breath. Monica didn't interrupt me, just took notes and nodded from time to time, as if she were sewing the tatters of a story together to find where the cut had been made. When I took the stack of papers out of my leather satchel and put them on the table, she put on her glasses and read them slowly. I saw her frown and press her lips together. A few minutes later, she looked up. Her gaze was serious but not cold. "You were right. This is signature forgery and fraudulent sale. The people listed as buyers have no legal right." She paused and lowered her voice. "Mr. Miller, this isn't just about a house. This is about your dignity." That word brought a lump to my throat. I nodded, unable to speak. Monica stood up and pulled out an empty folder. "We'll start immediately. I will file for an injunction in civil court to suspend the validity of the contract. Then we will file a criminal complaint for signature forgery. I just need you to authorize me to represent you." "If we do that, my son will be investigated, right?" I asked quietly. She looked at me intently for a long moment and then answered with a firm voice. "Whoever breaks the law must face the consequences, whether it's your son or a stranger. Justice is justice. But remember, I'm not here to help you get revenge. I'm here to help you be respected." Those words fell on my soul like drops of water on dry earth. If Rose were alive, she surely would have said the same thing. I signed the authorizations with a shaky but steady hand. Monica filed the documents and handed me a copy. Keep this. The house is still in your name. Don't let anyone in without a court order. Before I left, she added in a softer voice, I lost my mother when I was 14. My relatives tried to take some land from my father. He fought until the end, not for the land, but for something my mother always told him. Dignity isn't inherited, it's defended. That's why I chose this profession. I remained silent. I just bowed my head in thanks. When I left the office, the sun was still intense, but it suddenly felt strangely pleasant. In my shirt pocket, the newly signed authorization felt like proof of what I had just recovered, confidence in myself. In the afternoon when I got home, Rusty ran to greet me, as happy as if he knew his owner had just won the first battle. I sat on the porch step and petted his head, whispering, Rose, can you hear me? I've started. The wind blew through the trees and the leaves whispered like an answer. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's face from that morning, his gaze cold as ice, his voice dry as a judgment. Each memory was a jab in the chest. I got up. I poured myself some water and went out to the porch. Rusty followed me, lying at my feet and resting his head on them as a gesture of comfort. The sky was dark that night, moonless, with only the yellowish glow of distant lights. I sat in the wicker chair, contemplating the house submerged in darkness, and I suddenly realized that I had never felt it so alive. This silence was not one of emptiness. It was one of waiting. It was the breath of all the years that had passed. I remembered Rose. Every time I felt lost, her image came to my mind. I heard her laugh, the affectionate scolding when I forgot to eat lunch, the whisper of her dress as she moved around the kitchen. In my hazy dreams, she always wore her light blue floral blouse, her hair pulled back, and that look of hers, tender but strong, as if to say, Ezekiel, don't let them erase you. I spoke aloud, in a whisper. You know, Rose, they think I'm weak, that I'm old, that they can throw me out on the street like a shadow. But I'm still here, and I'm not going to let anyone trample on our memories. The night wind brought the smell of damp earth. A door creaked in the darkness, and I thought that, perhaps, that was her way of answering. I looked towards the wall, where our wedding portrait still hung. A thin ray of moonlight peeked through the clouds, reflecting on the glass, and making Rose's eyes seem to glow. I smiled, feeling a strange lightness. You're right, Rose. No need to be angry. You just have to be firm. I got up, went to the old desk in the living room, opened a drawer and took out the small notebook I had kept since my construction days. On the first page in my handwriting and blue ink, I had written, What's built with love can't be demolished by betrayal. I added a few more lines. Today I met a woman named Monica Evans. She said dignity isn't inherited, it's defended. I believe her. I believe Rose. And I believe this house still has a heart that beats. I closed the notebook and left it on the table. Outside, the wind rattled the door, sounding like the rhythm of time's breathing. I knew sleep wouldn't come soon, but it didn't matter. I was used to long nights. Only tonight, in the darkness, burned the small light of a new faith. I went out to the porch one more time. In the distance, the city lights flickered. I sat down. I closed my eyes and whispered, Thank you, Rose, for not leaving me alone in this battle. Rusty shifted, curling up tighter against my feet. The wind brought the scent of the lemon tree from the yard, the tree I planted when Daniel learned to walk. Maybe it was trying to tell me something too, that deep roots don't fear the storm. I nodded in silence. That's right, tree. We'll stand firm. The next morning, as I was sweeping the yard, I heard banging on the gate. It was hurried, insistent, different from the neighbors. Rusty barked loudly, the fur on his back standing up. I left the broom. I dried my hands on the old rag I wore at my waist and walked over. Behind the iron gate was Daniel, alone, without his lawyer, without his shiny car. His blue shirt was wrinkled and his hair was stuck to his forehead with sweat. I watched him for a long moment. The air felt thick, broken only by Rusty's low growls. "What are you doing here?" I asked calmly. Daniel lowered his head and took a deep breath. "I want to talk. We can do it out here. You don't need to come in." I rested my hands on the gate, looking him directly in the eye. He hesitated a moment and then said quietly, "Dad, I was told you went to see a lawyer." "That's right," I replied, "and I asked her to protect what you tried to steal." Daniel bit his lip. I could see the confusion in his eyes. He looked down, avoiding on my eyes. "There's no need to make this bigger, Dad. I just wanted to resolve things peacefully." I let out a laugh, not loud, but enough to make the air even heavier. "Peacefully? You think bringing a lawyer to my house, reading me a fake contract, and kicking your father out onto the street is peacefully?" He fell silent. I felt a knot in my throat, not of anger, but of pity. The son I had taught to live with integrity was now lying to me with a shocking calmness. I lowered my voice. "Daniel, I'm not angry because you need money. I'm angry because you forgot who I was to you. I'm not some old piece of junk in your life." He clenched his fists, his voice breaking. "Dad, I didn't want to hurt you. It's just my wife, the financial situation, the pressure. I thought you'd understand." "Of course I understand. I understand you've put a price on your own father." I turned to go inside, but then I heard the squeak of the house door. Ethan came out, his backpack on, probably on his way to school. Seeing his father, he stopped short. "What are you doing here?" His voice was sharp, very different from the boy I knew. Daniel avoided his son's gaze. "I just came to talk to Grandpa." "Or to force him to sign another paper?" Ethan interrupted, planting himself in front of me. "If you have any shame left, you should leave right now." I put a hand on his shoulder, gentle but firm. "Calm down, son. No need to shout." Ethan bit his lip, his eyes full of tears. "I can't stand seeing how they treat you, Grandpa." I turned back to Daniel. "Do you hear him, Daniel? What you've lost isn't just a house. It's the look in your own son's eyes." Daniel fell silent, his lips trembling. A moment later, he said quietly, "I just want everything to be like it was before." I looked him straight in the eye. "Like before? Then start by doing the right thing. Stop lying. Face the consequences." I gripped the iron gate tightly. "And now leave, Daniel. I'll see you in court." He stayed a few more seconds. Then he turned and left, walking erratically under the blazing sun. When his footsteps faded, Ethan turned and hugged me tightly. I felt his fast heartbeat, warm and strong. "Don't worry, kiddo," I told him quietly. "We don't need hate. We just need the truth." Rusty came over and lay down beside us. I watched Daniel's figure disappear at the end of the street, and I sighed. In my heart, there was no more anger, only a quiet sadness. The sadness of a father who has just lost a son, but who has not yet lost hope. That afternoon, rain settled over the neighborhood, a fine but persistent rain that left drops on the window panes, forming long rivulets. I was sitting in the kitchen, a cup of coffee in my hands, listening to the patter of the rain on the tin roof, like the slow beat of the house's heart. Rusty slept curled up by my chair, his eyes half closed. Beside me, the old telephone rang. It was Monica. "Mr. Miller, I'm calling with news," she said, her voice clear but with a hint of emotion. "The court has accepted the lawsuit and has issued an injunction. Any act of sale or eviction on your property is prohibited until the investigation is over." I gripped the receiver tightly. A feeling of relief and emotion ran through my chest. "Does that mean they can't touch the house anymore, right?" "Exactly, sir. From now on, Anyone who tries to evict you will be violating a court order." I heard the sound of the rain mixing with her voice, like the melody of a faith that was playing again after years of silence. "Thank you, counselor," I said, my voice breaking. "You don't know what this means to me." "Of course I do," she replied with a slight laugh. "For many it's just a case, but for you, I understand. It's a whole life." After the call, I turned off the kitchen light, leaving only the glow of a small lamp filtering through the window. The rain was falling torrentially outside. I looked at Rose's photo. The water reflected the light on her face, making her eyes seem alive. I whispered to her, "See, Rose? Finally, someone is listening to us." I took my old notebook and added a few lines. "The court has accepted the case. They can't take the house from me. For the first time in many years, I don't feel erased from the world." Suddenly there was a knock at the door. I went to open it and found Ethan, soaked, his shirt stuck to his body and his hair messy from the rain. "Grandpa, sorry. I shouldn't have skipped class, but I had to come," he said all in one breath. "Easy, son. What happened?" I brought him in and dried his hair with a towel. Ethan showed me his phone. On the screen was a post on social media. The old man suing his son for stealing his house. There were hundreds of comments. Some mocked, but many defended him, saying, "The man is right, and dignity has no age." I looked at the screen and then at my grandson. "Are you embarrassed, Ethan?" He shook his head, his eyes shining. "The opposite, Grandpa. I'm proud. At school, my friends read the article. The teacher said you are the old man who is teaching the whole country about self-respect." I was stunned, and then I burst out laughing. A sincere laugh that echoed in the damp kitchen. Rusty lifted his head and barked a couple of times, as if joining the celebration. Ethan hugged me, warm and trembling. "I want to help you, Grandpa. Even if it's just sweeping the yard or carrying papers. I want to do something." I put my hand on his shoulder. "You already have, son, by not being ashamed to call me Grandpa." Outside, the rain began to let up. I looked out the door and saw the lemon tree in the yard, with new leaves just sprouted. The rain had washed away the dust, making the tree look brighter. I knew that, just like that tree, I too had begun to grow again. Late, but firmly. I poured coffee for both of us. Ethan sat across from me, smiling. "Grandpa, now anyone who tries to kick you out will surely have their legs shaking." I replied quietly, but with conviction. "I don't need them to tremble. I just need them to learn what I've learned in my whole life. You can be poor, but you should never be cheap." 2 days after the storm, I was on the porch shelling beans when Ethan came running, out of breath. "Grandpa, my dad is furious. It's chaos at home." I looked up and set the basket aside. "What do you mean, son?" "This morning, someone from the court came to deliver a summons." Dad read it and threw his coffee mug against the wall. "Mom is crying, and my siblings are hiding in their room. I didn't know what to do, so I came running." I looked at my grandson, my heart sinking. Not from fear, but from pity. In this story, no one was really winning. We were all being dragged by a storm that Daniel himself had unleashed. I pulled up a chair and asked Ethan to sit. "Listen to me, son. When someone does something wrong, their own conscience torments them. We don't need to hate them." He looked down, his small hands trembling. "But I hate seeing my mom suffer and hearing Dad yell at her because of what's happening with you." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Everything will pass, son. The truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs to stand firm." That afternoon, as the sun began to set, I heard footsteps in front of the gate. Without needing to look, I knew it was Daniel. He opened the gate abruptly and came in, his face red with anger. "What did you do, Dad?" he demanded. "Today, the whole neighborhood found out. You've made a fool out of me." I didn't answer right away. I poured myself a cup of coffee and then said, "You only feel ashamed when you do something wrong, Daniel. If you feel humiliated, maybe it's because you know you crossed a line." Enough, he slammed the table. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was just trying to settle some debts, but now everyone sees me as a traitor. I looked at him, serene. We don't need anyone to tell us. You exposed yourself, son. He fell silent. The house sank into a stillness broken only by Rusty's soft barks in the yard. I saw in his eyes how the anger slowly turned into fear. Perhaps for the first time in his life, Daniel realized that his actions were irreversible. I said slowly, word for word, Daniel, I don't want you to go to jail. I just want to get back what is mine and keep the only thing we have left between father and son, the truth. He looked away, biting his lip. You're destroying this family. I smiled faintly. A family isn't built on papers. It's maintained with honesty. And you sold that long before I raised my voice. Daniel stood motionless, his hands hanging at his sides. A moment later, he said quietly, I don't know what to do anymore, Dad. I looked toward the door, where the evening light painted the yard gold. You can start by stopping. Don't let your son see you as a coward. He was silent. Then he turned and left. This time I didn't call him back. There are paths one must walk alone to discover where the cliff is. Ethan came out later with a worried look. Are you okay, Grandpa? I smiled. A slow but firm smile. I'm fine, son. When you can tell the truth without your voice trembling, it means you've already won half the battle. Together we looked towards the gate. Daniel's silhouette faded into the twilight. A breeze came in from the yard, filling the kitchen with the scent of fresh lemon. Inside I heard Rose's voice, whispering, Storms also clean, Ezekiel. I looked up and nodded. Perhaps the storm was already beginning to recede. 2 days after the confrontation, the morning felt strange. The sky was overcast and the wind picked up early, shaking the branches of the lemon tree as if announcing something. I was sweeping the porch when a car screeched to a halt in front of the gate. A familiar voice, loaded with anger, yelled, Dad, open the gate. I sighed. I knew it was Daniel. I didn't hurry. I hung up the broom. I wiped my hands, and only then did I open the gate. Daniel was there, his shirt half-buttoned, dark circles under his eyes, and his face gaunt. Behind him, Veronica, his wife, clutched her purse, her face tense. What else do you want, Daniel? I asked in a monotone voice. I want to talk, but I can't take it anymore. The press, the neighbors, even at work, they're all talking about this. You've made me the laughingstock of everyone. No, son, you did that to yourself when you sold something that didn't belong to you. Veronica intervened, trying to stay calm. Mr. Miller, please understand. Daniel was just pressured. We had debts, stress. If you would agree to transfer the house, we would give you your share. We would take care of you properly. I looked her straight in the eye. Do you think I need your money or your pity? The air grew thick. Daniel took a step forward, his fists clenched. Enough, Dad. Don't act like you're an innocent. You made mistakes too. You never trusted me. You always thought Michael was better. I was silent for a few seconds and then said slowly, I don't choose one son over another. I just hope to have sons who knew how to respect me. Veronica pulled on Daniel's arm, her voice trembling. Let's go, please. This is pointless. But Daniel shrugged her off. No, I want you to know that I worked for this family too. I paid for all of Mom's funeral expenses, I replied, my voice low but firm enough to stop him in his tracks. I haven't forgotten. But there's something more valuable than money, Daniel. Honesty. And you sold it along with this house. He stood there, trembling with anger. I saw a flash in his eyes, not of hatred, but of fear. The fear of a truth that had slipped from his grasp. Veronica looked at me with a mixture of shame and regret. Sir, why can't you forgive him? She said quietly. I replied, Forgiving isn't hard, but first there has to be someone who dares to say, I was wrong. Daniel turned away and said, so low I could barely hear him, "Will you ever understand?" "Maybe, but that day will come with the truth. Not with lies," I retorted and closed the gate. I stood motionless for a long time. The wind was blowing hard, breaking a branch off the lemon tree that fell on the steps. I bent down to pick it up, watching the sap ooze out like blood. Rusty came over and rubbed his head against my leg as if to say, "Don't tremble, owner." I petted his head and whispered, "A storm is coming, Rusty, but our roof is stronger than before." In the afternoon, Monica called. "Mr. Miller, the court has just issued an official summons. Daniel and his wife must appear next Tuesday. Don't worry, I'll be by your side." I looked at the lemon tree in the yard as the first drops of rain began to fall. "Thank you, counselor. Whatever the outcome, at least this time I won't be silent." I closed the door. Between the sound of the rain and the first rumbles of thunder, I thought I heard Rose's voice echoing from a distance. "Respect isn't begged for, it's earned." I smiled. Outside the storm was raging, but in my heart the dawn was beginning to break. 3 days after the confrontation at the gate, the neighborhood returned to calm. But it wasn't a peaceful calm. It was the stillness that precedes the storm. I felt it in the air, as if the whole house was holding its breath, waiting for a verdict. In the morning, I made my coffee and sat by the window. The first rays of light filtered through the curtain, illuminating Rose's photo. I looked at it and whispered to her, "You know, they think I'm weak, that I'm just waiting for death. But they forget that you only truly get old when you stop believing in justice." Rusty lay at my feet, lifting his head from time to time, as if he understood. In the distance, the call of the newspaper delivery truck resonated, as familiar as the neighborhood's heartbeat. I took a deep breath. Although I was prepared, I felt a weight in my soul. It wasn't fear of losing, but fear of seeing my own son in the defendant's chair. As I was thinking, there was a soft knock on the door. It was Veronica. She was standing on the threshold, dressed neatly, but with an exhausted look. I opened the door and invited her in. She didn't sit down. She stood there, wringing her hands. "Ah, Mr. Miller, I didn't come to argue. I came to ask you to reconsider." "Reconsider what?" "The trial. Daniel is devastated. He's lost his job. His friends are avoiding him. His son won't speak to him." I sighed, looking at her intently. Misfortunes don't just happen on their own, daughter-in-law. I don't wish pain on anyone, but whoever sows lies reaps loneliness. Veronica's eyes filled with tears. "I know Daniel was wrong, but please, at least drop the criminal complaint. You can keep the house, but don't let this go any further." I turned to the window. The lemon tree was still there, its leaves trembling gently. "You know something, Veronica? That tree lost a branch in a storm, but I didn't cut it down. I just bound it, so it could heal on its own. But if the root was rotten, no matter how much I bound it, it would die anyway." "Do you think Daniel is a rotten root?" she asked, her voice trembling. "No, I believe that anyone can heal if they dare to face their mistakes. But so far he hasn't." She fell silent. I clearly saw her hands trembling, and in that tremor, there was not only fear, but also genuine regret. "Veronica," I said softly, "advise your husband to go to court and tell the truth. The more he runs, the more he will lose everything. I don't want my son to go to jail, but I also can't allow Rose's memory to be trampled." She bowed her head and said in a whisper, "You're right. I'm tired too. Daniel doesn't listen to anyone anymore. He just pities himself. Then let justice speak for us." When she left, I stood at the door, watching her. Her hair waved gently in the morning breeze. Perhaps, somewhere inside her, there was still goodness, just obscured by fear. At dusk, Monica stopped by. She brought a thick folder and a kind smile. "Everything is ready, Mr. Miller. The hearing starts tomorrow at 9 in the morning. You just have to tell the truth. You don't need to memorize anything. You don't need to act. Just be yourself." I nodded, my voice firm but grave. "I have nothing but the truth, counselor." She smiled and put a hand on my shoulder. "And that's enough." When she left, I went out to the porch and sat in my wicker chair. The sky was cloudy again, and the wind brought the damp smell of the earth. I took out my old notebook and wrote the last entry for that day. "Tomorrow I will speak on behalf of all the elderly who have been forgotten. Not to win, but to be heard. Just once. So they understand that silence doesn't mean submission." I closed the notebook and looked at Rose's photo. "Tomorrow, Rose, you'll come with me, as always." And in that instant I swore that, regardless of the verdict, I would walk out of that courthouse with my head held high. That morning the sky was a soft gray. There was no sun nor rain, just a cold breeze that slipped through the narrow alleys. I got up earlier than usual, made my black coffee, and sat in silence for a few minutes in front of Rose's photo. She looked at me with that familiar expression, both tender and firm. I whispered to her, "You're coming with me today, right?" Rusty lifted his head as if he understood, and barked softly twice. I petted his back and smiled. "Watch the house, old friend." I put on the white linen shirt that Rose had ironed for me for my 70th birthday. It was a simple garment, but for me it was like a flag. White because I had nothing to hide and because no one could stain my name again. At 8, Monica arrived. She got out of the car, her thick briefcase in hand and a serious but warm look. "Ready, Mr. Miller?" "Ready since the day they tried to kick me out of my house," I replied firmly. She nodded without saying more. We made our way to the civil courthouse. The city was buzzing with its usual rhythm, but inside me, all the sounds seemed distant. I only heard my own heart, beating slow but strong. The courthouse was in an old cream-colored building, with high ceilings, thick walls, and a smell of varnished wood mixed with paper. Inside, the chairs were arranged in rows. I saw Daniel sitting on the other side, next to Veronica and the young lawyer who had come to my house the first day. Daniel's gaze avoided mine when I entered. I didn't feel anger, only pity. Pity for the son who had banished himself from his father's shadow. The session began. The judge's voice sounded dry and monotonous. "Case number 2473, 2024. Miller, Ezekiel versus Miller, Daniel et al. For signature forgery and fraudulent sale." Monica was the first to rise. Her voice was firm, every word clear. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Ezekiel Miller, 81 years old, is the sole and legitimate owner of the property in dispute. The signature on the sales contract has been confirmed as forged by the handwriting analysis. We request that the contract be declared null and void, and that the corresponding legal responsibilities be demanded." Daniel's lawyer stood up, attempting a smile. "Your Honor, my client acted in a family context, with no intent to defraud. It is simply a misunderstanding about property rights." I felt like laughing, but I held back. I was called to testify. The room fell silent. I walked slowly, each step as if I were treading on my own life. When I was in front of the judge, I took a deep breath and spoke. "Your Honor, I haven't come here to fight over money. I've come for my name. I built that house with these cracked hands, with the sweat of my youth, and with the love of my late wife. I'm not so old as to forget everything, and I never signed the sale of that house. I don't want my son to go to jail, but I also can't allow the work of a lifetime to be disrespected." I lifted my head and looked at Daniel. "Daniel, if you're listening, remember this. I don't hate you. I just want you to learn again the first thing I taught you. The truth is not for sale." Someone in the room sobbed quietly. The judge nodded and motioned for me to continue. An officer presented the expert's report. The judge read the conclusion aloud. "The signature of Mr. Ezekiel Miller on the contract does not match any of the original samples." A dense silence fell over the room. Veronica covered her mouth with her hand. Daniel lowered his head. His hands clasped Ezekiel, trembling. I just listened to the beat of my heart, and then the judge struck the gavel 3 times. The sales contract is declared null and void, and a criminal investigation for signature forgery is ordered. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just exhaled. A silence, as if a rock I had been carrying for decades had just been released. Monica gently squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "We did it, Mr. Miller." When I went outside, the sunlight dazzled me. Ethan was waiting for me at the entrance, with a paper bag containing 2 donuts and a thermos of coffee. "You won, Grandpa," he said with a radiant smile. I put a hand on his shoulder and smiled. "No, son, we didn't win. We simply kept what was worth keeping." We sat together on the courthouse steps, sharing the pastries. I took a sip of coffee, feeling its warmth all the way to my soul. A breeze blew, bringing with it the scent of some lemon blossom. I looked at the sky, saw the clouds dissipating and the sun beginning to shine. "Rose," I whispered, "justice doesn't arrive late. It just walks slowly, like me." That afternoon, when everyone had left the courtroom, I stayed a few more minutes, not to savor the victory, but to listen to the strange silence that fell after the gavel's verdict. The faint light from the window projected onto the table, illuminating the photo of Rose I always carried in my wallet. Her eyes looked at me without pride or reproach, only with the serenity of someone who understands that everything, in the end, returns to its place. When I came out, Daniel was still there, in the hallway. Almost everyone was gone. Only he and Veronica remained. She clutched her purse, her eyes red. Daniel looked at me without saying anything. The wind tousled his messy hair, and for a moment he looked like a lost child in the city. I didn't avoid him, nor did I approach. I just waited. "Dad," he said in a hoarse, broken voice, "I don't know where to start." I looked him straight in the eye. "Start with the truth." He was silent. A moment later, the words came out of his mouth like a torn wind. "I was wrong, not for losing the trial, but because I forgot who you were." I said nothing. The wind rustled the leaves of the lemon trees in front of the courthouse. I walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. "It's too late to change the outcome, but not for you to start over." Veronica sobbed. "Sir, believe me, I never wanted this. Daniel just thought he was helping the family." I nodded slightly. "I know. Sometimes people help by destroying what is most valuable, what they can no longer see." Daniel lowered his head. I knew he was ashamed, but I no longer felt anger. The anger had been replaced by exhaustion, and then by compassion. "Dad, if you want, I'll give you back all the money, the house." I shook my head. "It's not necessary. I don't need your money. I just want that, when they ask you who you are, you can hold your head high and say, 'I am Ezekiel Miller's son.' If you can do that, it will be enough." He cried, not loudly, but with a silent, childlike tremor. I turned away, because I didn't want to see his tears. There are things that need time to be cleansed. As I reached the steps, Monica caught up with me. "Are you okay, Mr. Miller?" "I'm fine," I said, "but not exactly happy." "You don't have to be happy," she replied. "It's enough to feel at peace." She smiled and handed me an envelope with a red seal. "Here is the official copy of the verdict. From now on, the house is yours, legally and permanently." I took it, feeling the weight of the paper in my hands. It wasn't the weight of a property, but of dignity. Ethan ran to me and hugged me from behind. "Grandpa, let's go home. I want to make you some coffee." I laughed and patted him on the shoulder. "Yes, let's go, kiddo. Our house is waiting for us." On the way back, the car drove through the streets I had traveled thousands of times. The neighborhood was the same. The street vendor calls, the smell of sweet bread, the moss-covered walls. I looked out the window and saw the evening light falling on the red rooftops. A strange sensation filled my chest. a deep and true peace. When I got home, I opened the gate. Rusty shot out, barking and circling around me. I bent down and petted his head. "We're home, old friend. Our house is still here." Ethan dropped his backpack and smiled brightly. "Now you'll have to let me plant another lemon tree." I laughed. "Of course, one for the past and one for the future." That night I sat on the porch, listening to the crickets and the smell of damp earth. I looked at Rose's photo under the yellowish light and whispered to her, "I didn't beat anyone, Rose. I just got back what you always believed in. Dignity isn't inherited, it's defended." Rusty lay beside me, breathing evenly. The wind blew through the branches of the young lemon tree. For the first time in many years, I felt that my house truly was alive again. The next morning, a soft light filtered through the window. I woke up early, as always, but this time without the weight in my chest. I got up and opened the doors wide, letting the breeze in with the scent of lemon blossoms. The house seemed to breathe. Every wall, every brick, freed from the fear of being forgotten. Rusty ran around the yard, barking happily. I smiled, took the broom, swept a little, and stopped in the middle of the yard, looking at the sky. It had been years since I had seen the sky so blue. Perhaps, when the soul is freed, even the color of the sky becomes clearer. Ethan came out with 2 cups of coffee, his hair messy and his eyes still sleepy. "Grandpa, I made it a little strong, but I'm sure you'll like it." I smiled, took the cup, and took a sip. "Strong, but just right. Thanks, kiddo." We sat under the lemon tree. The dewdrops still glistened on the leaves, reflecting the morning sun. Ethan looked around and said quietly, "I saw my dad yesterday. He was across the street, just looking over here, and then he left." I was silent for a moment, not surprised. Don't hate your father, Ethan. Anger is more contagious than compassion, but only forgiveness makes us grow. "I don't hate him, Grandpa. I'm just sad. I don't understand why people hurt the ones who raised them." I put a hand on his shoulder, as light as the wind. "Because they're afraid of losing, so they take. Because they don't know how to love, so they hurt. But one day, son, they'll understand that no property can buy peace." We sat in silence for a long time, listening to the birds chirp. I looked at the lemon tree and said softly, "You know, this tree broke a branch in a storm. I thought it would die, but it held on." "Because you took care of it," Ethan smiled. "No, it was because it has roots. People are the same. If you have roots in your soul, no storm can rip you out." After breakfast, Michael called from Phoenix. His voice sounded happy and light. "Dad," he said, "I read the news. I'm so happy for you. I think you've done again what no one else dares to do. Stand up when others have already given up." I laughed. "It wasn't for bravery, son. It was because I have you and Ethan and Rose. I'm not alone. I'll be back soon, Dad. I want to paint that old wall so it looks brighter. I'll be waiting. This house still has room for everyone." At dusk, I sat down to write a few lines in my notebook. The house is still standing, but more importantly, so is my heart. Peace doesn't come from victory. It comes from not letting resentment move in. As it got dark, Ethan brought 2 glasses of lemonade. "For the lemon tree?" he joked, sitting next to me. We watched the sunset together in silence. The wind carried a scent that reminded me of Rose's perfume. I thought I heard her voice whispering next to my ear. "I told you, old man, the soul heals when it's defended with love." I smiled, looking at the orange-tinted sky. Rusty rested his head on my legs, breathing peacefully. Ethan was by my side, his head resting on my shoulder. The house was quiet, but in that stillness I clearly heard what I hadn't heard in years: the sound of life returning. A week after the trial, life slowly returned to its former rhythm. I'd get up early, make my black coffee, and listen to the oldies station on the radio, the songs Rose loved so much. Everything seemed peaceful, but in my heart there remained a silence that was hard to name. Maybe it wasn't that I hadn't forgiven, but that some wounds need to be heard, not to be forgotten, but to be understood. That afternoon, as I was watering the plants, Rusty barked softly. I turned around and saw Daniel standing at the gate, a small paper bag in his hand. His face no longer showed arrogance or anger, just the weariness and sadness that I myself had known years ago when I lost Rose. "Come in," I said in a gravelly voice. "This gate has never been closed to you." He entered slowly, and the smell of damp earth and lemon filled the air. We sat facing each other on the porch, in a silence that lasted for several minutes, until he finally spoke. "Dad, I don't know where to start," I replied softly. "With the truth, like I told you last time." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the floor. "I went to Monica's office. I withdrew the appeal. I have nothing left to fight for. This house, I don't deserve it." I was silent, listening to the wind in the tree's leaves. "It's not about deserving or not, Daniel. It's about acknowledging your mistakes. The fact that you did that is enough for me." He opened the paper bag and took out an old photo frame. "I found this in the garage. It's of Mom, on her wedding day. I thought you'd want to have it." I took the photo with trembling hands. Rose was smiling radiantly, her eyes as bright as the morning I met her. "Thank you, son," I said quietly. "Your mother is surely smiling too." Daniel looked up, his voice breaking. "I miss Mom, Dad. I miss the way she looked at me, as if I could do no wrong. I want to learn how to do that again. With you." In that instant I no longer saw the man who had betrayed me, but the son who once sat on my shoulders to reach the first lemon from the tree. I got up, went to the kitchen, and came back with 2 cups of hot coffee. "Drink. We don't need words of forgiveness. The coffee will speak for us." He took the cup, his hands shaking, his eyes moist. "Dad, I don't expect you to forget. I just hope you'll still call me son." I smiled faintly. "You always were, son." An old familiar song was playing on the radio. I closed my eyes, feeling my heart as light as the first morning after winter. Ethan arrived just then and stood in the doorway, surprised. Daniel turned, his voice deep but firm. "Hi, son. I didn't come to argue. I came to listen." After a moment's hesitation, Ethan came closer. I put my hands on both of their shoulders and said slowly, "Nobody loses everything as long as they dare to tell the truth. This house was a place of silences out of fear, but today it will hear the voice of compassion." A breeze blew across the porch, mixing the scent of coffee and lemon. Rusty lay down between us, wagging his tail gently, as if marking the rhythm of a piece that had just found its way back home. I looked at the orange sky and whispered to myself, "Rose, in the end, wounds also know how to speak, and they speak with the voice of forgiveness." From that day on, the house took on a different rhythm. Daniel came to visit several times a week, often with pastries or a bag of fresh lemons. There were no more arguments, just the warmth of hesitant but sincere conversations. One afternoon, while I was sitting in my wicker chair, I watched him painting the outside wall of the yard. The sound of the brush against the plaster was constant, like the beating of the house's heart. Next to me, Ethan had his notebook open. "Are we still writing today, Grandpa?" he asked. I smiled. "Of course, but we won't just write my story, but ours." I told him about the first years with Rose, how we raised every wall and planted the lemon tree. I told him how she used to say, "Ezekiel, homes are built with respect, not with walls." The boy wrote slowly, concentrating. "That's good," I told him. "When you write from the heart, there are never mistakes." A while later, Daniel came in, wiping his sweat. "Is the coffee ready, Dad?" I nodded. "It's on the stove. I made it a little strong today, like life itself." He laughed, a laugh I hadn't heard from him in years. The three of us sat around the table, and Ethan placed his notebook in the center. I want to call this story The House That Learned to Breathe. Daniel and I looked at each other. That's a good title, I said, because this house truly has come back to life. My son took his cup, his gaze lost in the yard. I thought I just needed money, but what I really lacked was Mom's voice. And yours. The wind blew, and the leaves of the lemon tree whispered. With the sound of Ethan's pencil on the paper, I remembered other elderly people suffering in silence. I said quietly, "Son, there are a lot of people like me out there. Maybe this story isn't just mine, but theirs too." Daniel looked up, his voice deep. "If you want, I'll help tell it. I can use my voice so that others don't go through the same thing." I nodded. "Then tell it, but don't talk about the mistakes. Talk about how we got up after them." The sun had completely set, dyeing the porch a golden color. Ethan put down his pencil and read a fragment. "In this house, the silences no longer weigh us down. They breathe." I looked at Rose's photo on the wall. Her smile was still there, intact. I whispered, "See, Rose?" In the end, our house learned to breathe. The story spread faster than we imagined. A week later, Ethan's teacher invited us to the school. They wanted to hear the story firsthand. When we arrived, there were 100 people in the courtyard. On a blackboard, it read, "Life Talks. Dignity has no age." I stood in front of the microphone and began to speak slowly. "My name is Ezekiel Miller, and I am 81 years old. Sometimes life demands that you stand up, even when your back is already stooped." I told them everything, without embellishments, in the tone of someone chatting over his morning coffee. When I said the phrase, "You can be poor, but you should never be cheap," I saw someone in the audience lower their head. When I finished, the entire courtyard stood up and applauded. A slow applause, like a thank you. Afterward, a young journalist approached me. "Mr. Miller, I'd like to tell your story on my radio show, Hometown Voices. It won't be a story of pity, but a reminder for people to remember their parents." I nodded. A few days later, she came to the house with a small recorder. A week later, the program aired. Ethan turned on the radio during dinner, and my voice resonated, deep and hoarse. This house wasn't bought. It was sown, and what is sown with love cannot be ripped out, even by betrayal. I listened in silence, feeling a strange peace. The next day, an elderly neighbor knocked on the door. "Mr. Miller, I heard your story. Thank you, because you spoke for many like me." For the first time in my life, I felt that my voice was not just a sound. It had become an existence. The culmination of it all came one morning when Ethan ran in with a package wrapped in brown craft paper. Opening it, I found a small hardcover book. On the cover was a printed image of the lemon tree in the yard, with a clear title, Ezekiel Miller, The House That Learned to Breathe. On the first page, a dedication to Rose, to Ethan, and to all who learned that dignity has no age. "I printed it myself, Grandpa," Ethan said, his eyes shining. "Only 10 copies. I touched his shoulder. "You've turned our story into something no one can ever take away from us." That afternoon, the house was filled with voices and laughter. Michael arrived from Phoenix with his family, and Daniel came too, quieter, but with a kind look. When Ethan handed him his copy of the book, Daniel held it for a long time. "Every line I read is like hearing your voice in the courthouse. Thank you, Dad." "Thank you for being here," I replied. "What happened between us has been carried away by the wind." We had lunch on the porch, chicken soup, sweetbread, and black coffee. While the children ran around the yard, I simply sat and listened to the life becoming normal again, but full. At dusk, Ethan turned on the radio. It was a special interview on Hometown Voices. The host was saying, "Mr. Ezekiel Miller's story has traveled all over the state. A father who stood up to reclaim his dignity." They played a segment of my recording. Justice doesn't always give you back what was taken, but it does give you back what you should never have lost. Respect for yourself. Nobody said anything. I heard my voice resonating in the house, and in that instant, I realized it was completely healed. As night fell, after everyone had left, I stayed alone in my wicker chair. I opened the small book and read the last lines Ethan had written. My grandfather taught me that silence can also be a form of resistance, because whoever is quiet doesn't always give up. Sometimes they are just waiting for the right time to speak again. I closed the book and looked up at the sky. A soft breeze blew, filling the air with the scent of lemon blossoms. I thought I heard Rose's voice whispering, "You did well, old man. You learned to breathe again." I smiled and put a hand to my chest. "Yes, my love. This house breathes, and so do I." I looked toward the gate, where the dim light from the street filtered in. The house was silent, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was alive, and in the night wind, I clearly heard the sound of memories, of faith, and of a life that refused to bow its head. If this story captured your heart, give the video a like, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the box on the left of the screen. Thanks for watching.